Hello, class. I wanted to welcome you to this PowerPoint presentation. I think it would be very helpful to supplement the information that you're getting from the textbook and also from the PowerPoint slides. This presentation I'm about to share with you is something that I use when I do my project management consulting with my clients. So I think this would be a very, very useful introductory PowerPoint slide to give you a good overview of what you're going to be learning in the class. So I always like to start off with a cartoon, and this is from Dilbert, and it has to do with the boss wanting to delegate a project, but really doesn't know what to do with it and just looks outside the office and finds an innocent bystander walking by and throws the project at the person saying, "Do it." And then he believes now the project is on its way. Well, of course, that's not what we're going to be talking about in this class, but at least I wanted to start off with a little bit of humor just to let you know that this is how things often happen in the world of project management. Okay, so the next thing is what is a project? Well, a project is something that is desired because either something doesn't exist or it doesn't work the way that you want it to work. So a good definition of a project that I like comes from the consultant Joseph Duran, and he says that a project is a problem scheduled for solution. So let's break this definition down. The first thing is you have a problem. And the problem is, as I just mentioned, that something doesn't exist that you want, or it does exist, but it doesn't work the way that you'd like. So both of those things are problems. Now, we have a solution, and the solution that's desired is a solution for anybody who has an interest in the project. So it could be customer, it could be top management, it could be the project management team, or even society. And the fact that it's scheduled means that it's orderly, it has a time element to it, the project tasks are sequenced. So this is a really good basic definition of a project. And of course, we could find something much more elaborate. Now, since this is project management, we need to bring up the concept of management. And I believe that all of you have taken the Principles of Management course. So you probably remember that there are 4 basic managerial functions, which are planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And I like to add one more, which is decision making. So here we go. Now, another definition of management is that it's getting work done through other people. So I wanted to make sure that you know that project management is not a brand new topic. It relies on many other basic things from general management. So if you're not a good general manager in terms of knowing how to plan, organize, lead, control, and also to make good decisions, it's going to be difficult for you to be a good project manager. Now, this is a nice slide that compares general management and project management, and you can see there's a huge overlap. I would say that there's probably about an 85% commonality between project management and general management. But there are some differences, and to illustrate the differences, I put 3 functions here from general management in blue, and then 3 from project management in red. And let's take a finance department. So you have a chief financial officer. That person is part of general management and has formal authority for all things financial in an organization. There's also ongoing operations within the finance department, which means that the same things happen every month usually. And the department is stable, not in terms of the people being there forever, but the positions are pretty consistent and constant. Now, on the flip side, we have project management, where we have the project manager often does not have authority because that person has an informal role within the organization. The project is not ongoing, it's temporary because it's born, it lives, and it dies. And also the department is fluid because you have a lot of different people coming and going working on the project. So here's a good slide. Why is project management needed? Well, the first thing is there's probably more projects going on than any time in history, so there's a huge demand. The second thing is that many people don't know what they're doing with project management. Too often, a project is assigned to a subject matter expert, maybe an engineer or a scientist or an IT person, but that person does not have a good grasp of general management concepts and principles. So there's another reason. So those are just two of the reasons. We could come up with three others, but let's just move on. So an overview. The first thing is it has a universal application. So when I do project management consulting, a lot of times the client will ask that I customize the project management approach, and I tell them yes, but I often don't do it because it's so universally applied. So here's an example. Let's say that we want to hold a high school reunion. Well, that takes a project management approach. And then when they built the tunnel underneath the English Channel connecting England and France, they needed a project for that. Well, interestingly, both of those situations I just described, the high school reunion and building the tunnel, they both use the same project management tools. It also requires a situational approach, which means that every project is different. So let's say that you want to open up a new Walmart. Well, chances are the new Walmart will be 99% the same as an old Walmart, but the 1% different makes it a situational requirement. Likewise, if we want to build a flying car, that may require 99% something different than what we've done before. But in both cases, it requires you to review the situation and come up with the right approach. Project management also has two relationships to change. The first thing is it brings about a change because people are now doing things different. Let's say that we build a bridge across a river. Well, instead of driving 20 miles to a road to get across the bridge, now you can maybe cross the bridge right where you live. So that's a change. The other thing is project management requires people to do things differently because they're working in a team environment, let's say. So that also brings about change. The other thing that I want to emphasize is about the firm foundation. This means that if you don't have a good grasp of general management principles, if you try to implement a project without having those as a baseline or a foundation, it's going to be very difficult for you. Now, a lot of times people, they get confused about terminology. So when I first started working, my boss would say, "Hey, Swaim, I have a task or I have a project for you." Well, it really turned out to be a task because I could do it in 1 hour and it wasn't really that complicated and I did it by myself. Then we have programs. So an example of a program is the space program, which will probably go on forever. But those tasks that you work on, they make up projects, and then the projects that you work on make up programs. So in the space program, you could have a project to go to Venus, you have a project to go to Saturn, and so forth and so on. So just to emphasize the nature of projects, they're temporary, so they don't last forever. We already talked about that they're unique, they satisfy stakeholders, and they're complex, combined, and they have elements that are sequenced. Now, in terms of stakeholders, here's a slide that elaborates on that. So a project can have the customer, you could have society, you could have the project manager, you could also have coworkers, you could have the company, the project team, and suppliers. So you can see a stakeholder is anybody who's affected by a project in a positive or a negative way. So here's an example of how it affects a stakeholder in a negative way. You may be familiar with the outlet mall they built in Woodstock. And before that was built, there was no off-ramp. There was nothing there but a field next to 575. Well, when they built the outlet mall, it provided a access to the neighborhood there with the off-ramp. So the people living in the neighborhood, they may not have been happy because now somebody could get off the off-ramp, break into their house, and be back on 575 in 5 minutes. So you need to be careful of identifying all stakeholders, ones that are negatively and positively affected by the project's output. Okay, this is an important slide. So all projects are governed by what's called the triple constraint. So let's walk through this. We have the scope, which could be the performance of the project and also the boundaries. We also have the cost, and we have time. Now, based on this image, you want to have those three constraints balanced, which is the best way to go. But unfortunately, what happens is too often, as you see in the bottom diagram, bottom triangle, people want more, so that the scope gets increased, and that results in having to spend more money and also spending more time. But customers invariably want more, and they want it for less money and in less time. So right there, you can see a big problem for project managers. Now, what I'm going to do for a large amount of time, I'm going to walk you through all the pieces of a project that are needed from start to finish. So the first one is a statement of work, or an SOW. It's also called a scope of work. So what is it? It defines the requirements of the project. So when the project is done, what exactly is it going to do? And who creates it? It should come from your customer. Who knows best what the project should do than a customer? But unfortunately, too often the project management company will develop the statement of work, and that's not good, because the project management company does not know what's needed as much as a customer. So I highly recommend that you have the customer develop it. Now, as a project manager, you can help the customer develop it, but ultimately it needs to come from the customer in a, let's say, a letter or a memo where they sign off. So it's a formal document that comes from them. What do you do with it? Good question. It's used to develop the project charter. So the statement of work is like a demand in economics, and then the project charter is a supply. So the project management firm creates it. What does it do? It authorizes the project. So it's game on. And then what are the elements? The elements are pretty much the same as what's in the statement of work. They may be more specific to the project management company, especially if there are some different jargon types of things. But it needs to be 100% supportive of the statement of work. Now, the next thing that happens is you're going to come up with a work breakdown structure. And this is the graphical approach. What this shows, it shows all the pieces that are needed to complete the desired outcome of the project. So this is a stereo receiver, and you can see the top level has an amplifier, a tuner, and a preamplifier. And then each of those need assemblies, and then they need components. So what you're doing is is you're breaking your project down into all of its elemental parts that can then be assigned to team members. They can be costed out, and they can also be sequenced and put into a schedule. Now, you can also have an indented work breakdown structure, and this one is very good for large projects because you could see if you want to just go with the diagram with boxes, that's going to be pretty out of control. But this is something that you can easily do going down using Excel or something similar. Now, the work breakdown structure is great for assigning responsibility, creating the schedule, and assigning costing. Now, I want to take a minute to talk about the human resource plan because remember, you're going to have people working on your project. So you need to have your roles and responsibilities defined. This is really important. You also should have an organizational structure for your project, and it can be a matrix or it can be an organizational structure that's dedicated for the project 100%. You also need to make sure that your project team members comply with company policies. A good way to find project team members is by networking. You also want to make sure that you're using them properly in terms of capacity. You want to make sure they're trained, and you want to make sure that the project team members are rewarded and recognized. And I'm a big fan of rewarding your team as a team, not individuals. So it basically comes down to a all for one and one for all situation. Now, you may have a project management office, and this is not a physical office where people go. This is a virtual office, and it basically provides oversight for all the projects going on in the organization to make sure that everybody knows what's going on so you don't duplicate a project. And the project management office is very useful in sharing best practices so you don't have to reinvent the wheel for your project. Now, since a project is going to either be 1% new, 99% new, or somewhere in between, you need to be good at estimating. And there's three characteristics about estimating. The first one is occurrence. Is it going to take place? Yes or no? If no, there's no estimating needed. But if yes, then you have to decide, well, when is it going to occur? And the magnitude, how big will the project be? There's a lot of different methods you can use to estimate. You could use your work breakdown structure. You can use a historical analogy where you're comparing something in the past with your current project. You can use a walkthrough method where you work with your team and just walk through the different pieces of the project. You can also rely on standard costs, standard hours, where you already have things in place and you're basically going to be relying on those for your project. So just project those costs and hours, and you also can develop a series of ratios. Okay, so ultimately it comes down to money, and there's something called life cycle costing, which assigns cost to your project as it goes through time. You also should have a budget for your project where you can start with a zero-based budget, which is basically a blank sheet of paper and you build your cost from scratch for your project. You're also going to have the S-curve. We're going to take a look at that in a minute. Also, you're going to have cost codes where you need to assign codes to every task so the people in finance and accounting know where to charge money for your cost activities for your project. Another thing that you want to do is use value engineering, where you're going to go in and you're going to try to improve the cost of your project so that you can reduce the cost if possible. You're going to have various categories, and you probably have studied those in another class, such as fixed cost, variable cost, and so on, overhead. And then you need to control your costs, and this is where you use your budget. Well, here's the S-curve that I mentioned. And the way it works is as your project begins, you can see that the pink area, it's pretty flat. And then as time goes by, your project is going to go up in cost and value. And then at the very end, it tapers off. So keep in mind that this cost curve is a cumulative cost. Okay, so in terms of scheduling, you have two options. The first option is the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart has been around for about 100 years, came from Henry Gantt. So it's not an acronym, and also some people call it a gnat chart. It's not a big insect. So make sure you get the terminology correct, Gantt chart. Its nature, it has, as you'll see in a minute, it uses text and uses bars for timelines. The limitation, it does not easily show the critical path, but it is beneficial for small projects and also for presentations. And its construction we'll take a look at right here. So on the left side, you have the name of the task, you have the duration, you have start and finish. Then on the right side, you have bars that correspond to a calendar, and each bar represents a duration. And here we have the resources, the people working on the project. So this is a sample that is from Microsoft Project. Now, when you use a Gantt chart, what you can do is at a point in time, you can see how a project's tasks are doing. So this one, we have 3 tasks. The first one, the task is complete, and you're right on target as of May 21st. The second one, the project task is not due until May 28th, but as of May 21st, you're behind schedule because you can see the goldenrod bar is your actual work. And then the third task, as of May 21st, you're ahead because you have work that's completed through May 28th. So here's an example how you can use a Gantt chart in Excel for a media library. So you can list all of your tasks. Then you can put your relationships. So the D1A, D1B, that talks about the predecessor task. And then you put in how long each task is going to take. And then you have a grid that you created in Excel again. So the columns show all the different days that you're going to be incurring. So this is a calendar. And then you put in the duration. So the first task is 2 days. So the green bar shows 2. Then the next one is 5 days. And you can see you have a cascading kind of a stair-step situation. And then what we do is we could put in our actual work, which is represented by the red bars. Okay, now the next one is network scheduling. So you have Gantt chart, you have network scheduling. So the history, there were 2 methods. There was a critical path method, the CPM, and the program evaluation and review technique called PERT. And the mechanics for both of those uses either a activity on arrow or activity on node. Now the activity on arrow, what you do is you just use counters. So in this case, it's a member of the alphabet. And we have 3 different scenarios there that we can use. So the first one is composing music. So A and B, A is the lyrics and B is the instrument. So that's going to give you a score of music there. Customer delivery, you have a product A, and then it goes to 2 customers, B and C. And then you have a new product report where you have inputs A and B, and they create two different reports, C and D. Now, activity on arrow versus activity on node. So activity on arrow, as I mentioned, you put the activity name right on the arrow line, but in the node, you put the name of the task inside the box. So you can see the activity on node is a lot more user-friendly. So let's walk through an example. So this is something that you're going to be working on later on, and this shows a activity on node network. So we have task A through K, and it shows the different relationships between those tasks. And here's some terminology that you need to know. And I'm not going to go through this right now because this is something that you can read about later, but this is essential to use the network diagram method. And then there's some calculations that you can use to come up with those different definitions. So what we have here, we have an exercise where we have some predecessor relationships, and also we have some durations. So that's what I used to create the diagram. So far, we took our basic diagram and we're adding the durations in red above the boxes. And then what I'm doing is I added the early start and late and early finish for each of those tasks. So you could see that this project is supposed to take 57 days because the earliest finish for K is 57. So the way it works is that we start with A, and you can either start with 0 or 1. I use 0, and we're going to finish on day 4. So it takes 4 days. And then B can start on day 4. Now you may also want to start it on day 5. You can do it on either way, but just be consistent. So we pretty much just complete the rest of the early start and early finish using the rationale. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a backward pass. And the calculation for that was on an earlier slide, so you could study that. But this is going to tell us how much float time we're going to have for the various tasks. And the way that we get the float is we're going to subtract the earliest finish from the latest finish. And you can see that we have 4 tasks that have float: C, E, F, and H. And that means that we can work on these tasks at different times. But A, B, D, G, I, J, K, there's no float. That means that we have to work on them as soon as we can. If there's any delays on those tasks, then it's going to delay the overall project. So the critical path for this project is really important, and we find that it's the path that has the longest duration, and that turns out to be the path A, B, D, G, I, J, K at 57 days. All the other paths that we have a little bit of float. So the path A, B, D, E, J, K and A, B, D, H, I, J, K at 55 days, they only have a task with 2 days float, and then the path A, B, C, F, J, K at 37 days, there's 20 days of float. The difference between 57 and 37. All right, let's talk a little bit about capacity. Now, this is a big problem for many projects because capacity is usually not considered. Work just gets done, and hopefully it gets done on time, but it invariably does not. So you can see that this is a funnel that shows how oil flows through a piece of equipment. And down at the bottom, we have the word capacity with an arrow. And that narrow area regulates the flow of capacity. So if you pour too much oil into a funnel, it's going to start rising, the level, and eventual overflow. So ideally, you want to just put enough oil that is the same as the opening. And here's a really good slide that shows a resource load profile. So we have 6 weeks worth of work, and you can see a hyphenated line at 80. That shows what our capacity is for 80 hours in a week. Let's say it's 2 people working 40 hours. Well, for weeks 1, 3, and 5, we have too much work scheduled. And for weeks 2, 4, and 6, we don't have enough. So we could basically move some of the work scheduled for week 1, 3, and 5 into those other weeks. Now, here's a diagram that you can use to schedule work with your team. And this is called the responsibility assignment matrix. And in this project, we have 4 team members. We have Jill, Joe, Jim, and John. And you can see that we have R for responsible, C for consult, and I for inform. So all we do is we just use those letters to identify who's going to be working on which project or which project task. Now, change control. Your project is going to undergo a lot of changes. So we need to make sure that we identify how much will it cost to change the project. What are the results? Is it going to make stakeholders happier or more irritated? You want to track the change to make sure that they happen as planned. You want to approve them, and you also want to guard against scope creep, which is unauthorized change that affects all projects to a certain extent. Risk management. So there's a guy named Eric Verza, a project management expert, and he says project management is risk management. So he uses those two terms interchangeably. So all projects are going to experience risk to a certain extent. And we want to make sure that we understand how risk will take place. We want to plan for it. We also want to know the different types of risk, that there's qualitative and quantitative risk, and make sure we have a risk response. So we're going to talk a lot more about risk later on. You want to make sure that you have a quality plan and know the difference between quality assurance and quality control. Quality assurance is what you want, and quality control is how you get the quality you desire. So quality are requirements, and you need to design quality in, and then you have to conform to quality using quality control. And you also want to look at the tools and techniques that you can use to evaluate quality, looking at cost-benefit analysis, benchmarking, where you're comparing your quality to other projects or other companies, and design of experiments, which is looking at evaluating a series of variables all at the same time. The cost of quality is something that's important to measure. The worst quality cost is an external failure, where your project can cause a big problem after it's done and it's in the customer's hands. You can also have an internal failure cost, where your project causes problems but it hasn't been shipped. You also have inspection or appraisal, which is reviewing quality at every step. And then you have prevention, where you build quality in, and people will look at something and prevent projects a problem from hurting your project before it gets too much out of control. Another thing you're going to do for your project is obtain materials from suppliers. So you need to decide if you're going to make something or buy it. Then you need to have somebody in your team that is an expert with contracts. Then you need to pick sellers, which is not a trivial undertaking. The make or buy analysis essentially has these two curves, and when volume is high, it's less cost to make. But if volume is low, you want to buy something because you don't want to create capacity if you're not going to utilize it extensively. Okay, the last part of this lecture has to do with earned value performance measurement, which is really almost the holy grail of project management. So it came from the US government, which was really interesting, and as actually the Department of Defense. They enacted EVPM because they were tired of getting ripped off by suppliers. And it balances the triple constraint, and it can be used at any point in time to keep your project on track. But it does have some mechanics you need to know about. It balances, like I said, the triple constraint. So here's the triangle now that we saw earlier, but it has a pie chart. There's three definitions that you need to know. There's more than three, but there's three basic ones. So the first one is plan value. And this is what your project is worth in terms of its cost. We also have the earned value. This is what your project performed at in terms of its standard cost or hours, and then actual cost, which is what you spend. So this is a great slide that uses the S-curve, and you can see we have a green curve which shows actual spending, and we have a purple curve down here which is the earned value. So the earned value is less than the planned value, which is not good, and then we have the actual cost. So we spent more money. So basically this is a case of overspent and underperformed. And ideally you want the purple curve to be above the pink one, and you want the green one to be below the pink. And we're going to look at some variances here in a minute, but here's four variances that are very commonly used. So you have a schedule variance and you have a cost variance. You want these to be positive numbers. Then you have a couple of indices, the SPI and the CPI, and you want those to be greater than 1. So this final slide has an example where you can see plan value by month, earned value by month, and actual cost. And you can see that for the first 4 months, the plan value, earned value, and actual costs were identical. So we have no variances. But in the months of July and August, we actually had some favorable schedule variances and cost variances, which made our total project turn out to be favorable at the end. So I'm hoping that you enjoyed these slides, that they were useful for you. And I encourage you to go back and watch them again, because this is setting the stage for what you're going to be learning for the rest of the course. And I think this will be something very helpful. So I'm going to be recording a few more slides for you so that you could use in addition to the text material and the regular PowerPoint slides that correspond to the text. So I hope you are doing well, and I will speak with you soon.